All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott from Jeff Teaches Programming, and once again, what I have been doing is taking this freecodecamp.org article that is called "Learn TypeScript in 1 Hour," and I've ripped everything out of it, and I've been going through it myself by using the examples that they've shown in there, but putting them into the TypeScript playground. So I'm going to continue on. There's about 14 sections for me to go over, and I believe I'm on around section 10 now. So that's and I won't finish them all in this lecture, I don't believe. The next thing that was discussed was an interface. I like the way the author says this. An interface basically is a blueprint for the way you want something to look. For instance, if I create an interface that's called person ex1, then anytime I create an object of that type, they must have a name, which is a string, and they must have a number, or age, which is a number. All right, so those are the two properties that it must have. As it says here, interfaces are widely used in JavaScript for defining the structure of data objects, specifying the shape of function parameters and return values, enforcing consistency in class definitions, and facilitating code maintainability and collaboration. So in other words, this is a little bit more complex. So if you've never dealt with JavaScript before, you might want to wait a while before you get into classes. And I've already shown you, I went back, and I'm not going to go put it up right now, but if you go to the w3schools.com/js, we will, what the heck. So if we go into w3schools.com/js, there's their JavaScript tutorial. And if we go far enough in here, and I don't know where it is, but there you go, JS objects. So if you want to know about using objects in JavaScript, this is a good place to go. All right, to at least start getting some knowledge on that. All right. In TypeScript, an interface can define not only the structure of an object, but the signature of functions or methods. So in other words, this says that if you create an object of type person, or really type person ex2, that they must include this greet message that must accept a string and return nothing. So let's just run through the example that's here. Well, I don't want to be there. I want to be here. There we go. All right, so we've got this interface, and then we create an object of that type interface. We provide the name, we provide the age, and we provide this greeting method. So if we run this, Sarah says hello for TypeScript. All right. How about if we say this name, who is this dot age years old, and I'm going to copy that, so I've got, okay, so now it says Sarah, who is, whoops, what didn't it like? Well, it doesn't like something in here. I think we need the $sign in front of that. That looks a little better. So now if I did this right, it should now say Sarah, who is 30 years old, says hello TypeScript. There you go. Let's put that back in here. In fact, it was this line here, I believe. Nope. Copied the wrong one. Oh, we did the right one. I'm sorry. It should say Sarah, who is 30 years old, says hello TypeScript. Okay, so as it says, what we had in here was the interface definition with a name and age and a function called greet. We created an object of that type. We invoked the greet method on it. All right. Now the next thing says reopen the interface in use cases. Interface reopening, as it says, is a valuable technique for gradually building and extending interfaces. So as a project grows and you begin to add code to it, it allows you to add to it. So here we've got this interface in here that's called settings. It's got a read-only theme that returns true or false and a font of type strings. Then we add to it a sidebar, which is Boolean. Then we add to it an external, which is Boolean. Then if we create an object of that, it has to have all of these. So as it says here, we start by defining an initial interface called settings, which only has theme and font. Then in the reopening, we add a sidebar property. Then we have another reopening where we add a contact page where an external property is added. Okay, so when do you use this? As it says here. And I got to do a better job sometimes too of this. I'd like you to be able to read all of it at one time. All right, modular development. Interface reopening enables modular development. In other words, you can break down things and you can build it in sections, for lack of better words. Progressive enhancement. So you can extend an interface if the time comes that you want to add new features or new settings. Finally, as it says, a clear separation of concerns between different sections or modules of an application. So I guess, again, if you had different people building on it. In TypeScript, a built-in interface refers to an interface that is predefined and provided by the language. These interfaces define the shape and behavior of objects or values that are used in specific ways. I'm not going to run through this. This is pretty heavy stuff. Take a look at it if you want. All right. Interfaces versus type aliases. In JavaScript, both interfaces and type aliases serve similar purposes. In other words, they define custom data structures and types, but they have some differences in terms of how they're used. So, as it says, interface is declared using the interface keyword. Type alias is declared using the type keyword. All right, again, I'm not going to run through that at all. There's some heavy stuff in here. And again, my goal is not to confuse you. All right, we looked a little bit at classes in here, and as it says, in TypeScript, class type annotations are used to specify the types of properties, methods, and constructor parameters within a class. A constructor is a special method that's called when a class is created. All right. They define an expected data types and enable TypeScript to perform type checking. So here we've got this class that we're creating that's called product. Product has three different variables, or three different, I don't know what we call it here, properties. It has three properties. An ID property, which is type number, a name property, which is type string, and a price, which is type number. When you create an object of type product, you must provide the ID, the name, and the price. And then it takes whatever ID that you passed in. So that ID right there is this ID, that name is this name, and that price is this price. But you're assigning that ID there to this ID, that name here to that name here, and that price here to that price here. If you've never worked with classes before, it might look a bit confusing. That said, many programming languages do it in a similar way. All right? Class access modifiers. If something is private, let's start with public. If something is declared as being public, it's accessible from anywhere by anyone or anything. Now, I used to give these examples in class, and some people liked them and some people got confused by them. But when you think about a public servant, I know this is not the way that it works in life, but let's suppose we got President Trump right now, but let's suppose him being a public servant, that let's just suppose I was able to literally drive up to the White House, knock on the door and say, hey, I'm one of your constituents, I'd like to meet with the president. Since that president is public, all right, the idea is it should be available to me. All right. On the other hand, you've got private. So public is accessible, anything in here in this class or in any other class. Private, the members, as it says, are only accessible from within the class in which they're defined. They can't be used outside of the class. And again, when you think of private, as mentioned before, I should be able to go up to the president, knock on his or her door, and ask for an audience with him. That said, I'm a private citizen, so somebody can't really knock on my door and expect to come in and talk with me if they don't know me. All right. We also have protected, which is sort of a cross between the two. If something is private, it's available anywhere to anyone. So if you've got a variable, a class variable that you make, I should start with public again, I'm sorry. If you make a public class variable, that variable is available in that class and in any other class or anything that wants to use it. If in a class I make a variable private, it's only available within that class. If I make a variable protected, all right, what I can do is I can have a parent class who defines a child class, and that child class can even define child classes as examples, and I can keep going down. If I make a variable protected, it's available in the class and in any inherited classes. All right. And again, I realize some of the stuff is getting kind of heavy here, and I'm not trying to confuse anybody. All right, you can have class accessors, and they're known as getters and setters. A getter, again, I like to give examples that perhaps, okay, we're at 1350, we're fine. So let's say that I'm back teaching again, and it's first day of class, okay? And the first person walks in, and it's a young man, and I say, hello, and he introduces himself to me, and he says, my name is Jim Smith. And I say, okay, nice to meet you, Jim. I'm Jeff Scott. I'll be your instructor, etc., etc. Okay? Then the next person walks in and says, hi, my name is Jim Jones. And I say, there's two Jims in here. I'm going to call you James. Is that okay? All right. When I asked Jim his name and he told me, that's a getter. That's me requesting something and getting something back. When I told Jim, number 2, I'm going to call you James, that was a setter because I've changed the value that he wanted for me. All right, so those are getters and setters in a nutshell. Again, I'm not going to go through that any more than that. Classes can implement interfaces. As it says, it can help enforce a consistent structure of objects. And believe me, when I tell you this, I'm not trying to wuss out, so to speak, here by not going through this stuff. I'm really and truly not. But if you have little to no experience using classes, this isn't going to help you a bit. All right. Let's just quickly jump in. We've got 3 more to go. The next one's generics. And as it says, a generic in TypeScript allows you to write reusable code by passing a type as a parameter to another type, be that a class, an interface, a function. As it says, you don't always have to specify the type explicitly when writing code. The main advantages, as mentioned here, are code reusability, enhanced safety, and dealing with multiple types. They're typically used to create generic classes, generic functions, generic interfaces, and generic methods. And again, I didn't go into this stuff in this much detail in the C# class because they have generics in there also, and they actually look very similar to this, and I'm not going to go through this in here either. All right, a couple more things. Assertions. Type assertions, as it says, is a way to explicitly inform the TypeScript compiler about the expected type of a value, even if the compiler cannot determine it with certainty. As it says, they're useful when, as a developer, it gives you more knowledge about data types than TypeScript can infer. This is it in here. You're letting it know that you're expecting data to be a type string. So the explanation here says when we have a variable data of type any, it allows it to hold values of any type. But if we perform a type assertion, we're saying, hey, even though it'll take anything, now we're telling TypeScript that the data is going to be a string. All right. Finally, the last thing that's discussed in here is debugging. And debugging is a big thing. All right. There's 3 types of errors you can typically get in a program. The first are syntax errors. Well, one thing about TypeScript, it's very good about catching syntax errors. It's an error in the rules of the language. It's spelling something wrong. So if I were to come back into here and where I've got interface, if I were to change that and remove the E, notice how everything is now bad because there's nothing called interfac. That's a syntax error. All right, on the other hand, if you remember earlier we did an array. All right, we went through an array. And let's say that the array had 10 elements in it. And I tried to access element 15, even though there's only 10 elements. I wouldn't know there was an error until I ran the program. I'd get what's called a runtime error. All right. The other type of error is, let's assume, I'm just going to get rid of this for now, but let's assume here that I wanted to say let x equal 7, let y equal 3, let z equal x plus y, and they're not doing it here, but really we should have semicolons at the end of all these. Okay, I know I got that error. We'll fix it in a minute. That should have been z, not 7. There. All right. So we're going to come in here. We're going to say, all right, console.log x plus y equals, oops, I'll fix the error in just a minute, equals z. All right, instead of double quotes, I should have backticks here. Still not a backtick. All right, I think that'll work. So if I run that now, oh, forgot the $sign. You can see what happens if you forget it. So now it says 7 plus 3 equals 10. All right. What if I meant to subtract instead of add here? If I put a plus sign in there when I mean to subtract, that's a logic error. Those are the hardest ones typically to find because as human beings, we pretty much think we're infallible. I've had students tell me that. I remember years ago I had a young lady who came up to me and said, "Hey, can you come over here and look at my code? I'm having a problem. I don't know what it is." I looked at it and I didn't like to ever come off as being too, oh, I know everything. So I looked at it. I saw the error right away. But what I tried to do was point it out to her. And I pointed the area where it was, and she said, "Oh, it's here." And I said, "Yep." She said, "I don't know how that happened. I didn't do that." Well, somebody did. All right. So as it says, when you debug, it says first you should navigate to your tsont or tsc tsconfig.json file. There's an emit section in there where you can set there and enable or set up a source map feature. The source map, as it says, maps each line of code that's in there to its corresponding JavaScript code. All right. We'll get a new file in there that's whatever your name of your JavaScript file was, .map. If you open your file, as it says, you can do things like add breakpoints. What a breakpoint is designed to do is to stop at a specific part in the program and let you examine what's going on. All right. There's a debug panel that you can use with this. And with the debug panel, here's some of the stuff you can do. The first one is kind of nice, this step over. We'll execute a single line of code. All right. And you can basically have your code go a line at a time. You can have a step into to jump into a function, a step out, which is nice. Because if you've got a loop that's going 100 times, you can put a step out in there, which says, "Hey, I want to get out now." You can restart and you can stop debugging. It says under variables, you can see detected variables. You can put a watch on variables. So as the program is running, you can see how the variable changes throughout. Okay. And that, again, that was meant to be quick, and it was. All right. So I've given you most of the stuff that's been in that hour. If you think it's better, great. If you think it's worse, then go watch the other one. Totally fine. I'm not at all disappointed. But what I'm going to do next in here is I am going to begin to write a fairly simplistic JavaScript calculator. It'll have 3 files, an index.html file, a styles.css file, and we'll call it calculator.js file instead of script. Then we're going to take that program, and I'll give you all the steps, including some of the ones that are way up here. Whoops. Try that again. That are way up. Come on, Jeff. That are way up there that we didn't talk about before. So we're going to be basically doing this stuff that you see in here. Okay? And I'll even keep that highlighted so you can see everything that we're going to be going over. Okay? So I'll be back with that shortly. See you then.